Hello and welcome to this Chess Legends game review in which we find out how Bobby Fischer tricked his opponent. So let's begin here. This game takes place in 1970 between Samuel Reshevsky and Robert Fischer, also known as Sammy Reshevsky and Bobby Fischer. So, Reshevsky has the white pieces here, and he begins with d4. And Fischer responds with knight to f6, as he usually did against the d4 opening. So the game continues with c4. So Reshevsky immediately takes control of the center, and Fischer strikes back. So this opening was not played as often by Fischer, so it may possibly have taken Reshevsky by surprise here, because normally Fischer would play a King's Indian defense against a d4 opening. So the game continues with knight to f3 here. So if we go back 1 second, this is the Benoni defense here with this early c5 move. And it looked like after this knight to f3 move, the best move recommended by the computer was d5, gaining space in the center. But instead, Reshevsky develops a piece, and Fischer immediately captures in the center here, taking his less valuable c pawn on the side and capturing this valuable d4 pawn. And so after a recapture, we have e6 by Fischer, which will allow his bishop to be activated. It can also help with a d pawn push here to the center on d5. And the game continues with more development by Samuel Reshevsky. Knight to c3, helping control this d5 square and the e4 square. And the game continues with Fischer pinning this knight to the king. And this is ignored, and e3 is played to help fortify the center, protect this knight. And now we have knight to knight to e4 here. So we see the knight has been pinned and cannot move, and the pressure is added by jumping this knight into e4 here. And Fischer responds with queen to c2, the best move according to the evaluation, and this helps defend the knight. And now we have knight captures here. So Fischer exchanges off the knights, and it looked like in this position a3 would have been the best move, but instead this move is played to drive this bishop back. So the bishop retreats back to e7, which is the best move according to the evaluation. And now we have bishop to e2. So both sides are ready to castle now. And now castling by Fischer and castling by Reshevsky. So both kings are safe on the king side. The rooks have been activated where they can either help fortify the f-pawns or move towards the center. And now here we have a6, which according to the computer evaluation is an inaccuracy by Fischer. The computer recommends knight to a6, but Fischer decides to play this a6 move to prevent the knight from jumping here to b5, and perhaps to back up a b5 pawn push. And I assume he didn't want to put his knight on the edge of the board, although from a6 that knight could jump in to c5 and help blockade these doubled pawns that Reshevsky has here. And so the game continues with f4 by Reshevsky here, gaining space on the king side, helping to control this e5 square. And the computer states that this is the best move in the position. So Fischer responds by also trying to control this e5 square and giving himself a little bit of breathing room here, although his position is a little cramped. And now we have f5, a mistake here by Reshevsky. So I see with this move, he probably wanted to attack this more valuable e pawn here with the less valuable f pawn. And as he pushes this pawn forward or exchanges it off, it would activate this rook on f1 and maybe put pressure up here towards this f7 pawn. But the computer says that bishop to d3 is best, which would have created a battery with the queen and bishop up towards black's king side, attacking h7 here. But after this f5 move, we have a capture by Fischer, which it appears was an inaccuracy. A little better move would be to play e5, but perhaps Fischer avoided that because he didn't want a backwards pawn here on d6, but the pawn is here nonetheless. Now it is isolated. So it appears the e5 move would have been a little bit better, chasing this knight. But Fischer captures, and Fischer was a great attacking player, so he probably wanted to open the position up a little bit and give his pieces more room to attack. So now knight recaptures, bishop captures, and queen captures. So an exchange of pieces. Now we see here that Fischer has this isolated queen pawn, and generally when you have an isolated queen pawn, you want to avoid exchanges because the more pieces that are exchanged off, the harder it will be to defend this pawn. But perhaps Fischer felt that even though he had this isolated queen pawn, Reshevsky has isolated doubled pawns here and two other isolated pawns, the E and A pawn. So overall, Fischer's pawn structure is a little better as he only has 3 pawn islands and Reshevsky has 4. And generally, when an opponent has more pawn islands than you, that will give you more targets that you can attack. Okay, back to the game. We have knight to d7 by Fischer, activating this knight where it can jump to e5 or c5 here. And now bishop to f3, lining up on this unprotected pawn here. And so the queen protects the pawn, and now the rook piles up, and so Fischer defends with his rook. And now we have bishop to d5, the best move in the position, placing this bishop on a fine outpost here while also protecting this c4 pawn and aiming at the king and this f pawn along with the queen and rook. So a good move here by Reshevsky. And if we look at the evaluation, it is slightly in black's favor, and that is probably due to white's poor pawn structure here, all broken apart. All right, knight repositions to f3 here, possibly to attack the bishop, also protecting this h7 pawn in case the bishop would have tried to drop back to e4 and threaten a mate. Anyway, after this move, Reshevsky responds with bishop to a3 here, putting some pressure on this isolated d pawn. And now we have the rook moving here to protect the bishop, just in case this pawn would have to capture or attack something, especially on e5. This bishop has more protection, but more importantly, the rook here can fight for control of this half-open file, and after the bishop moves, attack here on e3, this e3 pawn. All right, now we have queen to d3, retreating back here to help defend this c pawn in case of a capture here. Once the knight captures this bishop, Reshevsky plans to recapture with his pawn to fix his pawns a little bit, get rid of these doubled pawns. So the knight captures and pawn captures, although the computer recommends that queen captures here would have been better, possibly because it would leave this d file open and make it easier to attack this isolated pawn of Fischer's. But I understand why Reshevsky did this. He wanted to undouble his pawns, and this restricts this pawn from moving and kind of cramps the position a little bit for Fischer. And now his bishop is bad behind this pawn, although this bishop, may move here to f6, where it can attack down the diagonal. All right, b5 is played, and that is another problem with capturing with the pawn. Now this b5 pawn is able to move, or this pawn is able to move forward to b5, and if this pawn had remained here, then we would have had a capture, and Fischer would end up with another isolated pawn. So another reason why the queen capture on d5 earlier may have been better. So now e4 is played, gaining space, protecting this d pawn, but this is still a backwards pawn here that could be a weakness. And now the bishop repositions up here to f8, where it can help defend the king, but it allows this rook access down the e file. And Reshevsky responds here with b5, where it can help cover this e4 pawn, maybe help push the c pawn forward. And now we have Fischer making a mistake here, rook to e5. It's not a terrible mistake, but the computer prefers a rook move to the c file to help fight for control of the c file and put pressure on this this backwards c3 pawn here. And now the game continues with c4, trying to push forward and attack here. So Fischer ignores that, doubles up his rooks, and now after captures, we have the king moving off this diagonal to prevent any surprise checks by the queen along the diagonal, or even the rook later in the game, or the bishop later in the game if it ever made it to this diagonal. All right, so the queen repositions, and now we have a tripling here of two rooks and queen all placing pressure on this backwards e pawn here. And Reshevsky responds by capturing the pawn over on the b5 square, and Fischer captures this valuable central pawn here and has taken control and is dominating this open e file. So we will begin to see here finally the answer to the title of this video. How did Bobby Fischer trick his opponent? So we see here after this capture, recapture, the queen is pulled down here to recapture and is in the center. And Reshevsky moves his queen to d7 here. So Fischer tricks his opponent by luring him in with a possible attack and checkmate. So the threat here is that Reshevsky could capture this f-pawn with check, driving the king to the corner, and then a queen sacrifice by capturing the bishop, and black would be forced to recapture with the rook, and then this rook would deliver a mate on f8 here. So that is what is tempting Reshevsky to move his queen up here and threaten this checkmate. But Fischer, one of the greatest players and a chess legend, he responds with a brilliant move, putting his queen here under attack, but it cannot be captured, as if the rook would capture, this rook would mate by check here on e1, and if the rook goes to block, it would just be captured with mate here. So the queen cannot be captured here. And in this position, I think Reshevsky was just stunned because he assumed he had a great attack and a threat of checkmate here, that Fischer lured him in with this promise of a possible checkmate. But Fischer turns the tables with this surprising and brilliant move here, attacking the rook, threatening mate here on f1. And it looks like Reshevsky just cracks under the pressure of this surprising and brilliant move. He makes a blunder here. King to g1 to protect his rook. But it looks like he could have kept the game even with, instead of that blunder, if he would have played queen to b5 here, forgetting about his checkmate possibility here, and instead retreating back and defending this rook. And that would have, with that move, if we look at the evaluation, black would have been slightly ahead, but the game would have still been pretty even. But after this brilliant move by Fischer and a blunderous king to g1 move, Fischer would be able to follow up with queen to d4 check. A great move here, driving the king back. The rook cannot block, as we would have rook to e1 with a mate here. So the king is forced into the corner, which is the best move. But if we look at the evaluation, Reshevsky is already losing. But now Fischer finishes it off with another brilliant move, just placing that queen again on a square where it looks like he could be attacked, but he cannot be captured, or it would just allow this rook to come down with check, and after the rook would block, the black rook would capture on f1 with mate. And so in this position, Reshevsky resigned here immediately, and Fischer won the game. So we could go and look at how the game may continue, just to give you an idea. Here, it looks like queen to b5, once again, is the best move. But the evaluation is clearly winning here for black, and the game would continue with this, attacking the rook with the queen and the rook. So here space is given to the king to escape, and it looks like that or h3 would have been the best move, but then play could just continue with capture, although here it recommends rook capturing with f1 is best. But this move would exchange queens, and black would just have an extra rook here, and that would be enough to win the game. So, after the king moves, the rook could just move here, and now this pawn will fall. So no worries about this queen side passed pawn, which will be captured. But that is how the game may have continued. So we see here how Bobby Fischer tricked his opponent by luring him in with a possible checkmate attack that looked too tempting for Reshevsky to pass up. But after that brilliant move, If we go back and look at this, queen to f4 here, just a brilliant move by Fischer, threatening capture of the rook with mate, and the queen cannot be captured here. It looks like queen to b5 would have been the best response. Rook to g1, second best, or even rook to d1 here. But even then, Fischer would have a slight advantage. But I think just the shock of this move after Reshevsky was expecting a checkmating attack here, and then Fischer just plays this brilliant move. I think it just completely surprised and shocked Reshevsky into making this blunder here to protect this rook. And then Fischer plays a great move here, driving the king in the corner, and then another brilliant move, putting his queen under attack again. But of course it could not be taken. All right, well, this video has gone on long enough already. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions. And if you're curious about this move, these moves here, this is known as a deflection here, where you deflect this piece away from the protection of a square or a line. So if this rook would have been deflected by capturing the queen to this f2 square, then the rook would have come in with a mate. And if you are unfamiliar with deflection and decoy, my next video will cover that, the difference between deflection and decoy. A lot of people confuse those, so be sure to check out that video. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.